We are back for another edition of the Astro Weather. How is everybody? It's Robert Phoenix. Good morning to all of you, wherever you are. Even if you're not experiencing the morning, you still are experiencing your own version of the weather. So I hope it's been a good day. We're on the new moon, which we talked about on the Sunday night show. If you missed it, I probably spent about 45 minutes talking about this new moon. We'll kind of recap some of that today. I don't want to go into like extreme detail again, but we'll go over some of the the bullet points. The bullet points, yes, of this new moon, and of course we have our star of the day. So um, I hope everybody is in an optimistic space, as we should be with this new moon upon us, this Sagittarian new moon. Peachy is having a grand old time over here. Peachy, what are you doing over there? The world of boxes, moving boxes, has proven she's okay. She's going after her shadow. I wish I had a camera, like just like take two, ready to ready cat cam, take cat cam. Yeah, she's on a box and she sees her shadow on this box and she's going after her shadow. She's she's really entertaining. Um, Jasper's entertaining, but in a different kind of way. Peachy's entertaining in kind of a goofy way, goofy cat way, if you know what I mean. Anyway, let us tarry no further. Let us not waste nor squander the hours of the day. By the way, we had a really great uh, serious sports last night, which you can catch the replay on here. We get into some fascinating topics, including, of course, the Jezebel of the NFL, Taylor Swift, and who's become the Yoko Ono of the Kansas City Chiefs, with the exception that the Beatles were still successful even with Yoko Ono around. But it's a metaphor, which most people over the age of 45 might be familiar with. She's breaking up the band. It was really interesting how it was Travis Kelsey who, on the last play of the game, or one of the last plays of the game, against wasn't the last play, it was one of them, against the Bills, Chiefs and Bills, classic American Prairie showdown, right? Chiefs being, of course, related to Native Americans and Indians, the Bills being the buffalo that they treasured, right? The pelts of the buffalo, the meat of the buffalo were what's on the menu during the. It's interesting. All these people. I'm sorry. I don't necessarily mean to offend any vegans amongst us, but you look at the plains people, the early Americas, right? What did they do? They ate meat. They ate buffalo. If you go up into the Pacific Northwest and some of those tribes, they had just an insane abundance of deer and elk and salmon, right? So that's what was on the menu. Buffalo was on the menu, but I guess on Sunday it was the Chiefs that were on the menu, and it was Travis Kelsey, Taylor Swift's BF, right, who makes this great play, and then it is miraculously negated by a penalty and sets off when that happens, there's just this layer of bad vibes that kind of get rolling inside of a locker room. So, man. Anyway, we talked about that last night. A bunch more. Let's do the weather. Let's get into the weather. There we go. All righty. 12, 23, 8 a.m. It's a different San Antonio. Oh, that's funny. This is what happens when you. It's not going to be that much different. But let me adjust it. I got to make this adjustment here. Cannot read. Cannot do it. Cannot go there. When we have the drop downs over on Astro.com, every now and then the drop down betrays you. You ever notice that? The betrayal of the drop down. It's not going to be that much different. Oh, by degrees. By degrees, yes. And we do our best to be as exact and specific as we possibly can be. Let me just bring this over here. Hold on. There we go. Oh. Okay. Let's do this. Let's do this. Let's do this. Let's close some of these windows. Some of these bloody windows. Do that. Okay. Let's do that. All right. And let's bring this over here. And we're going to have a voila moment. Voila. Voila. One of my favorite words in the English language, even though it is not English. All right. Voila. Voila. How come nobody ever names their kid Voila? Oh, voila, that's interesting. What does that mean? Where is that a family name? All right, here we go. We're still not quite there. We're still not quite new moony yet. You just zoom in a little bit. We are in exactitude. Later in the day or later in your evening, like that moon is still technically not new. It is 5 degrees off the sun. So when we move into the latter part, so we're still kind of in this balsamic phase, although it's not the same. By the way, this film that the Obamas did for Netflix, which hit over the weekend. It's on Netflix. It stars Ethan Hawke. It's called "Leave the World Behind." Have you guys seen this or heard about it? One of the things that I noticed was that it hit during the balsamic moon. Where's my tab? It hit during the balsamic moon, and back to this, and it really caused a lot of anxiety with people. A lot of anxiety with people, and it was a byproduct, I think, of that balsamic moon, which was in Scorpio. Right? We talked a lot about that on. I wish I would have covered it on Sunday night, and it dredges up fear and anxiety, dread, and there's also this sense of, and I haven't seen the movie because I don't have Netflix. I'm fundamentally opposed to supporting the people who produce the show. Sorry, that's just the way it is. I was a very early advocate of Netflix, and as soon as they went into streaming, which was around 2010, I jumped on board. I never did the DVD thing. I thought this is a joke. I mean, it wasn't a joke. I know people that did it, but it wasn't my thing. But of course, when Netflix went woke, I just decided they're not going to get my money. Although it's not really dependent upon my money because they're going to survive no matter what. But it was interesting because that movie really hit over the weekend. People had time to sit back and watch the film, and it really brought up heavy duty things. And one of the words that I wanted to use was covetousness, or when you covet something, when you and it coveting or covetousness, when you have where you are obsessed or possessed by a thing or many things, whatever that is, and that movie really dips its toe into that because you get that with the Scorpio moon. It's like other people's shit, and you just have to have it at any cost, right? So it was a really interesting movie to break on that balsamic fixed Scorpio moon, or at least be digested by large numbers of people over the weekend. Astrologically, I mean, it's if you want to use it, you want to use predictive programming, soft disclosure as a way to face your fears and be prepared. Well, it's a good form of medicine. But if it paralyzes you and you don't do anything about it, well, there you go, right? It's like it's doing what it's supposed to do theoretically on a certain level, but it could also catalyze people. Well, where am I? What am I doing with preparation? I mean, and I've talked about this before. What happens if you just have a normal quote unquote natural disaster? And they happen all across North America, all across the world, right? All across the realm, and various natural disasters in various regions. California, you get earthquakes and floods. Sometimes you get fire from the sky. Right here in Texas, we get storms, we get tornadoes, we get extreme heat temperatures, which you can't really do anything about over the long haul. But we also will get overnight, just really frigid temperatures, and sometimes lasting a week, 2 weeks. And I know that sounds funny for people that live in places like Michigan or Wisconsin or Minnesota or Pennsylvania, where it gets really cold, or Idaho or Wyoming. But here in Texas, we're just not prepared for stuff like that. And we had a major shitstorm, literally during the snowstorm in 2020, which we called the snowpocalypse. And here in the hill country, people were paralyzed. Luckily, I was on the right power grid. I had maybe one minor blackout at night. Not only that, but I was I was prepared to go for weeks without food if I needed to. And there were days where the roads were frozen over, and going to a store to get your food was, to put it mildly, an adventure because Texans don't know how to drive when the roads are frozen. So just that alone, right? Just to have something that gets you over a 2 to 3 week hump can be really important, right? But the whole thing with being prepared is that you have to buy time. Unless you, and I've said this before, unless you've got an underground bunker somewhere, or you've got some kind of bug out in the mountains that you are equipped and locked and loaded for a year to weather a very long-term storm. A lot of people don't have that. You need to at least be able to survive for 30 days, right? So when you look at that movie, which takes place or was viewed by a lot of people over the weekend with the balsamic Scorpio moon, what does it bring up? It brings up fear, dread, anxiety. What do you do with that? Well, watch the movie. if you want to know what not to do, right? So, here we are to bring it into the present. We're just a few hours away from this moon breaking through and having this conjunction with the moon and the sun. And again, I talked about this on Sunday night. If you missed Sunday night show, just going to give you a brief recap here. The best measure for what you want to do today is to fill your cup, right? When you look at the moon, especially when it's new, it's nothing, it's empty, right? It's been emptied. The potential has been emptied. So on this side of the sun, it is open for business, right? So you want to fill your cup. What do you want to fill your cup with? Things that inspire you. That's the nature of Sagittarius. Things that inspire you, good cheer. Um, it's part of the season, right? I mean, this is a great new moon, and we have Mars lurking back there, which I think is, a real force in the northern hemisphere during a dark time of the year, right? We need energy. We have the sun and we have Mars, which have been teaming up now for a while. So driving all of this is Mars in the background. It's the background. It's the background driver, the background chariot. So Mars is also motivation and the application of will. So what are you going to fill your cup with? That's the question. And in Sagittarius, the answer is positivity, enthusiasm, high principles, high values, right? Dare. This is the nature of this moon. Dare to feel differently than the currently constructed paradigm is telling you to feel. It's not to negate, because I do think the leave the world behind is important in the sense that it's telling you what's coming. If you're not listening, if you're not paying attention, I don't care who made the movie, right? They're letting you know. So you got to factor that in. But now we move into a different territory, right? Not that we just walk away and say, oh, okay, well, that was a nightmare. I got through that. I tell you, if you want to watch a nightmare dystopian movie, that'll really get your attention. And that one will get your attention. The Road. I'm a guy that watches movies multiple times. I've only watched The Road once, just once, because it is so heavy, so especially if you're a parent. The weird model for me during that movie was that um, the Viggo Mortensen character was a single dad, right? And theoretically, I'm a single dad, and he has a male son in the movie, and I have a male son, and when you get into that territory, it's kind of like, oh, a little too close to home, right? But if you haven't seen The Road, I recommend it. You'll probably only watch it once because you know how it goes. And once you go through it, you're not sure you want to go through it again. But moving forward with the moon here, it's like you got to fill your cup. So fill your cup you with the things that the world is telling you not to fill your cup with. Right? Dare in some ways. Dare in some ways to be positive. Dare in some ways to have a more expansive um, potential for feeling, right? Dare to be generous. Right? This is the nature of the new moon. You want to, over this period, you want to fill that up, right? Either with experiences or with deep emotional intention. Maybe this is the time of season where you really want to get, theoretically closer to what we call God. The internal experience of God, or the external internal, right? The external being, well, I'm going to go to church and worship, or I'm going to go to a forest and spend time there, right? Which in Sagittarian world is great, really great. So this is one of those days where if you can get out into nature, And even the next 2 days, so you can get out in nature and fill your cup with the power of nature and the expansiveness and the awe of the reality that we live in, not the dystopian, dark, entropic version of the realm, but things that really truly inspire you. Images and feelings of freedom and independence. And again, I'll come back to the word awe, like the awe of nature. Like that's what you want to fill your cup with. No, you don't want to. You also don't want to. We got to do this with this square with Neptune. You don't want to spill it out either. It's kind of like if you, if you've ever had a peak experience, the worst thing you can do is tell it to other people. That's the worst thing that you can do because it doesn't allow for that experience to really take root and bind with yourselves and become a part of you. And that's what we have here with the square to the sun. And we got a little bit of Mars square action coming up in the next few days. The square with the sun and the square with the moon with Neptune. So you don't want to spill it out, right? There is a a need for containment. When you fill your cup, don't overfill your cup. That's the other part of it, which is a very Sagittarian thing to do. Um, it's a really tricky square with Neptune because we're dealing with the two signs that are very religious, right? Sagittarius is orthodox, and Pisces is of the spirit. I think that's an interesting clash in a lot of ways, and maybe it has very little to do with you or me, and more to do with the institutional forms of religion and what we see over the next 48 hours. Keep your eye on the Pope. The Pope is a Sagittarius, whoever this character is. He's a Sagittarius, and there may be some interesting disclosure from that world, from Pope world, from the Catholic Church, from the Vatican. And it doesn't even have to be the Catholic Church, but I'm just bringing up the Pope because he is a Sagittarius. So this is, kind of in the mundane world. Secrets get leaked, belief systems are exposed, hypocrisy is demonstrated on a much broader level when we get into this Neptune square. So in your life, you want to make sure that emotionally you're not investing in things that down the road could make that problematic for you. Do not make any promises you can't keep over this new moon. And that's part of the challenge of the new moon because there's this potential of feeling good, like, you know what? Fuck these people. Fuck the dark architects. I'm going to fill my cup. I'm going to puff my chest, and I am going to proclaim, I am somebody. I am here. I count. I matter. In spite of everything that the realm is telling me now, and all that can be very plausible, true, and real for you, right? Very plausible, true, and real. And by the way, I encourage that. As long as you understand that you're part of a greater whole, a cosmic whole. But when we get into those states and we feel in some ways that we're invincible or we're kind of intoxicated with expansion, we will often do or say things that um, we cannot fulfill later on. So be careful what you emotionally commit to. And you're like, oh yeah, I did commit to that. Now I got to live up to this. Okay. So be careful with that. Um, I also talked about this on Sunday night with Mars and the Sun coming in and trining Chiron and trining the true node. And what you really want to do here with this energy is you want to be focused. You want to be focused. Sagittarius is it's the big wide aperture. Sagittarius is the Hubble telescope. Um, Aries is not that. Aries is the laser scope on your AR, right? I mean, that's really what Aries is. It's the laser scope. And so what we want here is we want focused demonstration of energy. So try to pick one thing. Allow the feeling to to fill you up, right? Like the spirit. Like, and you can. It's really interesting this whole um, dialogue around spirit. Al Dog and I were talking about this last night on Sirius Sports, which you should check out. It was a really good show, as I mentioned before. The two are not mutually exclusive. So I would take this energy and focus it like a laser, and pick one thing over this new moon that you really want to focus on, whether it's your health, whether it's productivity. And I know we're kind of like shutting down theoretically, right? This is what happens this time of year. But this energy will carry you through until June of next year. And clearly, right, this is also related to the Aries energy of the eclipse in April. So maybe this is all about an earlier part of the conversation we had in preparation. And in Aries, you want Chiron and Aries, you should be prepared for anything, right? Aries is all about first response, triage. Uh, it's defense and offense if you need it, right? So this is you've got to figure out how to be more independent. Aries is an independent sign. How many Aries people have you ever said, "Hey, can I help you with that?" No, thanks, I've got it. You sure? Yep, I got it. Like that's how Aries roll, right? So we have Mars coming in here and the sun coming in here, and we have the new moon coming in here. Ultimately, that's where your energy needs to go. Like one thing. And if it's related to being more independent and doing so in a way, here, I'll give you an example. Okay. Like this would be the cosmic carrot on the end of the stick. If you were driven by, oh God, it's gonna get dark, it's going to get really dark, and I'm going to have to protect myself and my friends and my family, which is true to a large extent, right? What is the old Sufi maxim? Tether your camel and then trust in God. Like that part is true, but what is your motivation for doing so? Again, taking care of people and taking care of your own well-being in your life is very important. Don't get me wrong, this is like a baseline fundamental human experience. But what if you had a different cosmic carrot at the end of the stick, right? What if your cosmic carrot at the end of the stick was, I need to do these things because I know at some point this nightmare is going to end. And I want to be there on the other side of this nightmare. I want to be there when we look around at each other and say, let's rebuild this. Let's do it right this time. And then something, well, a crack in the void, a flash of the spirit, and all of a sudden now people are operating at a different level, right? They're operating now. I'm not saying that there isn't a period of time in there that can be very challenging and trying. And I've been doing this for a while and breaking this stuff down for a while. And you look at what's coming, and that is true. And I would be lying to you if I said that it wasn't. But the motivating factor should not be that. The motivating factor should be what's on the other side. Who am I going to be on the other side? What and do I want to be there? Because if you believe in your heart of hearts that that is the world that we're moving towards, and by all means, put that cosmic carrot out there and let that be your motivating factor. Because you're coming from a place of awareness, which is, hey, if the shit hits a fan, I've got to take care of people. But that's just baseline. You need a higher motivating factor. And fear, by the way, is an amazing motivating factor. Fear will get people moving so quickly. How many people ran down to the drugstore and got the car jack? Oh yeah, a lot, right? But ultimately, it is not sustainable. Ultimately, And this is Sagittarian talk. We need a vision. And we may not all agree upon the same vision, but that's not important. What's important is that you need to connect with that vision. You need to connect with the cosmic carrot in front of you and say, this is why I'm here. This is why I'm investing in this. This is why it's important to stick around, because in my heart of hearts, even if you have 5% of that awareness in you, you can build on that 5%. And this is the beauty of this new moon in Sagittarius. Now, you may get over intoxicated with that moon Neptune square, which can happen. And by the way, I would highly, highly recommend that you don't get over intoxicated, especially if you're driving. But there's this theory in football, like in sports in general. It's there are athletes who are over enthusiastic or over demonstrative or overactive. In a lot of ways, you'd rather have those athletes on your team because you cannot teach motivation. You cannot teach energy. It's very hard. It's very hard to instill, inspire, and move people. If somebody has, a certain rhythm or pace, right? It's hard to, especially if it's kind of, very kind of flatline. It's hard to motivate them. I've seen this with athletes and coaches. There was this guy that played for the Golden State Warriors named Joe Barry Carroll, who was an amazing physical specimen, and it could have been a great center. But Joe didn't have a motor, and people started to give him this nickname, Joe Barely Cares. And George Karl, who was the coach of the Golden State Warriors, ripped his locker door off one night after a game because he was doing everything he could to motivate this guy. And then you have these other guys who are over the top, and sometimes they lose control. They play outside the lines. There's a much better chance you can rein them in versus trying to light a fire under a guy like Joe Barry Carroll. And that's kind of what we're talking about here in some way. So stoke your fire, stoke your fuel, find one thing, get your cosmic carrot out, and let that be your motivating factor. Venus, right in here, conjunct Pallas. It gets really right into that wheelhouse of pattern recognition around agreements, relationships. Today on Twitter, I posted this tweet about the new alt-right. It just dawned on me. If you go back and you look at what was happening in 2016, you saw the rise of all these people I had never heard of. Jack Posobiec, Mike Cernovich, Milo Yiannopoulos, Laura Loomer, Tommy Lahren. Like all these people who are these people? Where did they come from? All of a sudden they had a platform, right? They all had a platform. And they became the talking heads for the new alt-right or the alt-right. That it was just in time for Trump's campaign. There they were. It was a network all built out pretty much and ready to go. Alex Jones was the hub. So what do we have now? We have a new alt-right being born. And who are they? Well, you have Elon Musk. You have Tucker Carlson. You have Alex Jones, who was part of the hub. You have Andrew Tate, who's a Sagittarius, by the way. I messed up the other day. I called him a Scorpio. He does have a lot of Scorpio in his chart, though. Andrew Tate, to some extent, Joe Rogan. Although Rogan Rogan's not a joiner, which is interesting. Like he's not a joiner. When Trump walked into the UFC with Dana White and Tucker and Kid Rock, Joe Rogan was calling the fight. He wasn't in the crowd. He wasn't part of Trump's entourage. But we could throw him in there, right? So, and go back to Jordan Peterson was part of that new alt-right back then. So here we are again. It's this new cycle, new election cycle, and we have these new gatekeepers. And they're theoretically, you can throw Vivek in there, new layer of so-called truth, and they'll give you 90% of the good stuff. they'll leave the essential 10% of the kernel out of there. And Alex Jones has been famous for that. So don't expect anything different. Unless, he has a Saul Paul moment. But I just thought about this and thought about the birth of these new, and you can see this too, right? Even with the new moon coming into play in Sagittarius and squaring Neptune, you have to be aware. You have to be really, really aware of, and I'm watching people like Charlie Kirk, kind of rise to the surface and take on material that people in this space, when I say this space, I'm talking about myself and others, have been talking about for well over a decade. Well over a decade. And it's not that I have any resentment towards these people, but they're piggybacking on talking points that a lot of other people have been hammering away at for a long time. And then all of a sudden, because they're in the right place with the right situation, with the right people, in the right network, and in the right architects behind the scene, now they get to use the material. They get to mainstream the work that we've been working on. Now, I don't have a problem with it as long as it's truly representative of what we've been working on. In my experience and from what I've been seeing, it's not. There are there's some gaps in there. Anyway, I'm just pointing this out, and I posted that on Twitter today because you can see the pattern. There's a pattern there, and that's where we get into Venus and Pallas. You see the pattern. You see, and then over here we have Jupiter on the other side. A lot of people are celebrating. I even talked about it on Sunday night. It's like, wow, truth has crossed the Rubicon. Red pills for everyone, and there's some truth to that. But there's also some truth that you're not going to get it all. You're not going to get it all. Alex Jones will never, ever, ever talk about Netanyahu unless Netanyahu is clearly on his way out, in which case Alex Jones will pile on, right? And that's Jupiter on the other side saying, hey, look at this. Even David Icke was talking about this yesterday on Twitter. So it's about recognizing the patterns, right? Recognizing the patterns in relationship. Scorpio, uncovering, discovering, right? This is, and then the relationship between, the process and the networks that are doing this. We got we still have this Venus Saturn trine going on, which again, for relationship, if you're building, if you're establishing, if you're trying to um, create something that has long term value, that transit's it's at 9 degrees, so by Wednesday, it'll have moved on. Well, it'll separate. It won't totally moved on, but it's going to be it's a wide trine as it is, right? So you should be putting the finishing touches on some of those commitments that are very important to you. Anything else here? We got Mercury retrograde coming up. We'll talk more about that tomorrow. All right, there you go. There's your Astro Weather. So let's see this here. Let's go into the next portion of the show. It's of course, it's the True Hemp Science star of the day. Today was kind of a no-brainer. Although I feel, I would say I'm unqualified to talk about today's star of the day. But his life, in a lot of ways, transcends the boundaries of his chart. And today's True Hemp Science star of the day is Frank Sinatra. Let me get the banner up here. Okay, let's talk about Frank. Let's talk about his chart. I mean, how do you shrink an icon, an archetype in a lot of ways? And Frank is an archetype. How do you shrink an archetype into a 5-minute breakdown of what his chart is And I know we run into this with any number of people during this segment, but we do our best and we try to highlight what are the most meaningful components of the chart and how the chart reflects the life of the individual. So when I look at Frank's chart, one of the things that I see in terms of its energy pattern, and like this is a Jones chart, right? Jones chart, one of the Jones type charts, and it is what we call a seesaw chart, classic seesaw. So here's the horizon, and above the horizon, he's got Pluto, Saturn, Neptune, and Mars, right? And out here, and especially in the 10th house, it's professional. This is what the world sees. And Sinatra has Mars in Leo, uh, conjunct Regulus in the 10th house. You don't think that Frank Sinatra wanted to be top dog? He totally wanted to be top dog. And, he would go to almost any extreme in some ways to do that. The thing about Sinatra, which if you read stories about him, you'll find that he's actually very generous, right? He had a great deal of generosity and loyalty. Like if you were in with Frank, you were totally in with Frank. And he would there's this really interesting story. Who was it? I think it might have been the actor Eli Wallach. There was an actor who was having heart issues. I'm pretty sure it was Eli Wallach. And Frank heard about it and he sent for an ambulance. I think it was Eli Wallach to pick him up and to take him to Frank's doctor, who of course is the best, right? And again, I think it was Eli Wallach. You could correct me if somebody out there correct me if I'm wrong. And they were stunned. It was like barely knew Sinatra, but he knew that this actor needed help and he paid for it, right? Frank went out of pocket to pay for this. So he's got these really interesting stories around generosity. And you can see this. And he's, with Leo being the heart, Sagittarius ruled by Jupiter being expansive. So if you were in with Frank, and Eli Wallach probably didn't even know he was in with Frank. But if you were in with Frank, he was very loyal and extremely generous. I think we can make the case that Frank Sinatra is the first rock star. There's a little bit of Bing Crosby in there, but Bing Crosby was never dangerous. Bing Crosby was a crooner that comes out of the big band era. So is Frank Sinatra. But Frank is dangerous, and Frank is one of the and this is a quality that rock and roll has, right? It brings with a sense of danger, and Frank clearly had a sense of danger, whether it was implied or he carried it with him. And that sense of danger that was implied was that he was connected to the mob, and the mob supported him and got him on, into these hotels in Vegas. Of course, Vegas was his second home, right? Spent tons of time in Vegas. So, one of the things about rock and roll is we know that there's kind of this threat that goes along. And Frank kind of embodied that in his own way. His music doesn't sound like rock and roll, but he has that kind of rock and roll swagger. So to me, Frank Sinatra is like the first rock star. And, we can see that in a lot of ways also with Mars. And he's got Leo in the midheaven. He winds up being an actor, and a pretty decent actor at that. Somebody's calling me. Hold on. Oops. Hello there. Hey, so I'm in the middle of my live stream, but I wanted to take your call. So let me call you back after I'm done, okay? No, no problem. Talk to you later. Anyway, sorry about that. That's somebody who booked a reading. And they're calling, normally they don't answer, but they're calling from Australia. And those long distance calls, sometimes they're a little sketchy. Anyway, getting back to Frank, right? He became a good actor. He played and he took risks. And I'll tell you where he really, crossed over was he played a junkie in this movie called The Man with the Golden Arm. And that's so Neptunian, right? And he's got this yod going. Well, it's not quite a yod. The yod is with, it's an off yod, but he has an inconjunct with the moon and Neptune. So he really stretched his um, credentials in a lot of ways with that movie. He plays a heroin addict. And you would think that somebody who wanted to be seen as heroic or um, kind of this archetype of a post World War II hero. He wasn't like that. Even in a film, and again, his acting is very underrated. And he plays this incredible role in The Manchurian Candidate. Really, with Neptune on the midheaven and dealing with things like programming, uh, and it's really fascinating. I mean, his character is great in that movie, and he's in as much as Lee Harvey Oswald is not Lee Harvey Oswald. I was getting mixed up. Lawrence Harvey. Isn't that interesting? It's weird, right? I've always gotten Lawrence Harvey and Lee Harvey Oswald kind of mixed up, and in a weird way, they're kind of the same guy, right? But Frank Sinatra, Lawrence Harvey is really fucked up in that movie, and he's trying to untangle. Well, not really. He's just living his life and being manipulated. Frank Sinatra, who's part of the same. I don't want to spoil the movie. If you haven't seen The Manchurian Candidate, you have to see it. He's part of the same group that goes through this mind control operation in North Korea, and it's really interesting that the guy who plays the mind controller in North Korea in the movie also plays this character named Wo Fat in Hawaii Five O, who's basically the same character. Right? It's like, whoa, they never caught you. Anyway, um, but you can see this with Neptune here with Sinatra and his acting, and he's actually winds up being quite good. And in a weird way, he has his own principles and morals, right? Saturn, here's the loyalty, but he's not a guy you want to fuck over. Like you don't want to fuck Frank Sinatra over. And I think that if there's a possibility here that there's a generosity as well. I'm not making Frank Sinatra out to be a saint. He was not a saint, but his generosity is also down here in the fifth house with Jupiter in Pisces, right? And there's a part of Frank that's kind of a softie. And I know he could play the tough guy, but there was a part of Frank Sinatra that was a softie. But he also has this opposition with Mars, and you do not take advantage of Frank Sinatra's generosity or his being a softie. Now, I know this is a weird uh, sort of take on Sinatra, but I'm gonna say Frank Sinatra was sensitive. He was a sensitive guy. I mean, look at all this water, right? Look at all this water, Neptune on the midheaven, the inconjunct with the moon and Neptune, like trying to deal with his sensitivity. And he had to be, and he was in a world where a lot of the people around him weren't sensitive. Like they weren't sensitive. So he had to find a way to make that into a life path, which he did with music and acting. He's got some squares going on here. And then, by the way, Mercury in the second house, it's good for singing, right? It's good for the voice. He's a singer. Mercury in the second house is kind of like having Mercury in Taurus. And here we go. We're in conjunct city. Sun, Mercury in conjunct Saturn. To me, Saturn in the ninth house, you can take that a couple of different ways, right? It's Catholicism, it's the church, it's hardcore up there in the ninth house. Could also be the boss, the capo, right? Saturn and Cancer in the ninth house, and he's got this in conjunct going on. So I think Frank owed favors. He definitely owed favors. He would also put himself in the position where you could owe Frank some favors as well. Um, so what's interesting is, like, again, with the seesaw chart, this is the world and him being out in the world and being seen and being an icon. And then down below, we've got the family. And we know that Frank loved his kids. He loved his kids. Frank Jr., Nancy loved his kids. And he's got that true node in the fourth house. So, he's going to be a weird family man. And his family is going to be extended. It won't just be Nancy and Frank Jr. or whoever else. It'll be a bunch of other people. Now we're getting into Rat Pack territory with Aquarius and all those guys that he hung out with, right? His Vegas tribe, and Dean Martin and Sammy Davis Jr. and Joey Bishop and Shirley MacLaine and Peter Lawford. I mean, to me, this is where we don't see it in the 11th house, which is where you would think you would see the Rat Pack. No, it's down here, right? And how many of those guys would come around and hang out at Frank's place? A lot, right? A lot. And he hung out with artists and other people who were, in a lot of ways, nonconformists. It's a fascinating chart. I think in relationship, Sinatra suffers the most because he has Venus in Capricorn, and it's in the third house, which is the third house is more kind of brother sister. And by the way, I'm going long today because I'm not doing 15 minutes of flight. I have to get on the road and do move stuff today, which is why I'm going a bit longer. But I think relationships are where Frank is ultimately unfulfilled because you've got Venus in Capricorn. Maybe towards the end of his life, relationships get better. But I think it's really hard for people with Venus in the third house to have traditional, you know, partner relationships. This is much more sibling esque, right? Like being involved with your younger, well, it's like, he'd be the big brother to whoever he's married with. Like relationship isn't that, it's not that it's not important for Frank Sinatra, but it doesn't play out in a traditional way. And I think that's the area of his chart where he's the least fulfilled. Creatively, very fulfilled, right? Singing, sort of running his own show, Sun Mercury conjunction, second house, trining that Mars, kind of a force of nature, like somewhat dangerous in some ways. Like all these things, I think get played out fairly well in his chart, but not relationship. You never really hear about like the great love of Frank's life. You never really hear about that. Like, oh, this is the woman that stood by me. What do you hear about? You hear about the Rat Pack right down there. Libra rising, he's got the Libra rising look. I mean, Frank Sinatra, whatever you think of him, maybe the big ears or whatever, but he was always fashionable. Like you rarely saw Frank without a suit, and if he was without a suit, he was wearing kind of a nice like vest sweater thing, like they did back in the '60s and the '70s. He's a very interesting character, and his chart really plays out professional, home, family, creativity. Loves his kids. His family's not usual. It's not your typical, you know, nuclear family. It's a Rat Pack. It's all down here, right? All down there. Okay. So this is your True Hemp Science, of course, star of the day, Frank Sinatra. And True Hemp Science is the sponsor of this show. So if you spend $100 or more at the trueampscience.com website on some of the best and finest CBD products, type in 15MINS and you'll get a free goodie bag with your $100 plus purchase. $150 or more gets you free shipping, and there's always a 30-day money back guarantee. All right, I'm out of here. Thanks for being here. Thanks for hanging around and enjoying today's Astro Weather. Buy me a cup of coffee if you would like to. And mods, thank you very much for your participation and always being here in Chattaria. And I know there are a lot of hosts say I've got the best chat room or chat group on the internet. I'm going to put Chattaria in the freaking top three. Top three. Much love to y'all. We'll see you back here tomorrow for the Astro Weather. No 15 minutes. I got to hit the road today. Take good care. Bye for now.